And now the head of the National Security Agency testifying before the House today as lawmakers and intelligence officials try to reframe the debate about government surveillance. Let's take a look.
I have concerns that the intentional and irresponsible release of classified information about these programs will have a long and irreversible impact on our nation's security and on that of our allies.
Former NSA Director, retired Colonel Cedric Leighton joins me now. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, Kelsey. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. We heard in that testimony just how important the government feels these surveillance programs are to connecting the dots between terrorist movements around the world and protecting the United States. Tell us a little bit about these programs and what Americans should know about how they work and what they're doing to protect the country.
Right. Well, there's so many programs that NSA has as part of its collection efforts, but the ones that have been publicized, you're talking about the one that is known as the PRISM program, which is in essence looking at the computer digital information that passes between various computer servers. And then there's the phone bill situation that where the court order that governed Verizon's efforts was publicized by Ed Snowden. So these are two programs that are designed to use data that is really started in a foreign country and then either transits through the United States or is to a United States person. And basically what these programs are designed to do, Kelsey, is they're designed to make sure that we don't miss anything in terms of terrorist threats. Now, in today's testimony, the director of NSA, General Alexander, mentioned very specifically that over 50 areas, 50 different terrorist incidents had been thwarted either directly or partially because of the work that was done in these programs. So they're designed to protect the United States and its allies from terrorist events, and it's basically a system of really court-ordered, court-oversawn efforts that are designed to collect intelligence, but do so in a way that safeguards Americans' privacy rights and civil liberties.
And tell us a little bit about that, because we really want to know what kind of oversight these surveillance programs are subjected to.
Right, it's very extensive. So let's take, for example, either one of those programs. There are two sections of the FISA Act, Section 215 and Section 702, that govern these programs. And basically, under the FISA Act and under specific NSA procedures, there is no collection on the internals of communication that occurs between U.S. persons. They may have phone numbers in the PRISM database, for example, but those phone numbers are not accessed until they are thought to give investigative leads, and those investigative leads either come from overseas intelligence sources or from the FBI. So that's basically how it works. So if you have a threat, a perceived threat out there, let's say there's another bombing, God forbid, on the scale of the Boston bombing, and what they'll do is they'll go in and the FBI will ask the NSA if there's any traffic that relates to that particular incident or the potential for a particular incident like that. And they have to have a court order before they do that. So they have a blanket order that allows them to collect what is known as metadata, and then they go in and then if they have specific suspicions that some specific number is involved in a terrorist action or connected to terrorists, they can then get a further court order, which is like a subpoena, that then allows you to look at that particular number. And then if it comes to internal collection of that information, if it's a US-based number, then that goes over to the FBI, and the FBI actually performs the internal check on that. So it's oversawn internally, it's oversawn externally by the courts, through the FISA courts, the Foreign Intelligence and Surveillance Act courts, and then it's also overseen by Congress, specifically the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. So there are three branches of government oversee these efforts, and then within the executive branch, you have not only NSA, but you have the Department of Justice, and you have the Inspector Generals of all of these entities involved in every single piece of this effort.
And how does the U.S. screen people for access to the nation's classified information? I know we've learned over the past weeks that Edward Snowden was a contractor that was hired to work as a surveillance person with access to this information. So how are those people screened?
Well, they're screened theoretically very carefully. Obviously, no system is 100% perfect, but what happens is if you get a job and you apply for a job and you're accepted that requires a security clearance, you have to undergo a background investigation. That background investigation involves a one-on-one interview. It also involves you filling out a very long questionnaire called the SF-86. That form is, I think now 7 pages, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 10, up to 10 pages, and asks you all kinds of questions from your relationships to your financial background to any types of connections that you may have overseas, any types of political affiliations that you may have that are, basically against or antithetical to the U.S. government, advocate the overthrow of the U.S. government. Those are the kinds of questions that are asked. So then you fill out those forms, you have that interview, then you go in and they start interviewing your neighbors, your friends, your relatives, and then they'll ask those people, who else does this person know? Who else does the subject know? And then they go in and they make sure that, in essence, they vet you. So theoretically, it's a pretty thorough background investigation, but unfortunately, you don't always and cannot always gauge people's intentions just through a series of background checks. And that's, I think, what we're finding out in the Snowden case.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today with some insight on this. I know a lot of Americans are watching it closely. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Kelsey. Thanks for having me.
Sure.